At AIA Australia, we're making healthy living easier by incentivising your clients with rewards, like discounts on their gym memberships, eligible flights, and insurance premiums with AIA Vitality. It's no wonder that we've reduced client lapse rates by 50% and helped grow client engagement. To find out more, contact your AIA CDM today.
Welcome to this week's XY Live. Today we're doing a forum chat and we've got a very special guest with us, Ben Marshan from the FPA, who heads up all the super exciting, super complicated regulatory and policy position standpoint. So thanks for joining us, Ben. It's great to have you here as well.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Our pleasure. And just a big thanks to our friends at AIA for supporting the XY Live sessions as well. So look, today we're going to talk about regulation and policy, and we in the context of how we can improve advice. I think regulation is a very tricky sort of area. I think most people would agree that it's absolutely necessary, but at the same time, I think a lot of people think that there are things that could be done better or differently, to improve the outcomes for their clients and for their business as well. So for anyone that's watching in as well, I'd love for you to get involved. So if you've got any questions, any ideas, you want to put up answers to any of these questions to discuss, please feel free to just shoot them into the chat box on the side there. If you've got questions, we'll get to those as we go through as well. So we'd love to get your thoughts on these points as well. Cool. So look, the first question I want to ask, and I'm going to ask each of the guys on the line. Today we've got Clayton Daniel, entrepreneur extraordinaire, and the author of the amazing Fund Your Ideal Lifestyle.
Available at Amazon right now.
We've got Adrian Patty, claimed financial advisor and business owner of a multitude of businesses. Some operating inside regulatory guidelines and some questionably not. And we've also got Phil Thompson, who everyone knows who Phil is, and he's from Melbourne, but don't hold it against him. So, gentlemen, as I said, I'd love to hear from each of you on this one. First question I want to ask is, if you had a magic wand and could change one thing that would make advice better, what would that be? I'll go to you first, Clay.
Yeah, so that's a really easy question. APLs, get rid of them. I just cannot think for one reason why we need an APL. If something is registered, and governed by ASIC, why do we need a secondary layer from a dealer group to say what's good and what's not? At the end of the day, an SOA is simply a bunch of words used to get away with recommending whatever that dealer group wants product to be sold. So if we got rid of APLs, even with all the fancy wording in an SOA, you still wouldn't be able to get funneled down any particular product route.
And what do you say then, to just playing devil's advocate for a moment, what do you say to the argument that APLs provide a quality control standard to ensure that advisors are only recommending solutions that pass certain criteria?
Yeah, I'd suggest that argument's bullshit.
So, always interesting hearing your thoughts, Clayton. But surely there must be some level of quality control that's required, right? If you look at some of the products that have been out there, or strategies, things like Storm Financial, and various other
within the legislation at the time, like that. Just because something is fine, and that's my problem with SOAs. You can make anything seem compliant. APL, sure. So the argument that APLs are this awesome oversight that allows only great products to be used. I mean, why can't there be a universal answer to that question. Why does that change between dealer groups? You know, how can something be horrible here and then great there? It should just be universal. There should be one standard, and if it gets through that layer of due diligence, which I agree, there does need to be that layer of due diligence, but it should be standard across the industry, not individual dealer group.
Yeah, good point. And look, I do tend to agree as well. I think that's one way that you know can influence the outcomes for clients. So, but I do also think that, as you say, there needs to be some standard, because ensuring that you know that there is a level of quality that's there, and you know, especially the smaller advice practices, it can be difficult to sort of do all of that stuff in house. So,
yep.
Thank you, Clayton. Mr. Patty, what would you do with your magic wand?
Oh, wow. What a way to get yourself in trouble if you say the wrong things in this. Isn't it nice not having a licensee, Clayton, to be concerned about what you say publicly? I guess I don't really consider APLs at all when you're making a decision. I could just see Phil coming up with his arguments. I'm just trying not to give him too much ammunition. I think they've got a place. I think Peter Bowman's just raised the agribusiness disaster piece. You could argue that that's actually and from Clay's standpoint, that's actually the government's responsibility to filter that out at a base level, as opposed to actually anything like that. Another thing around the agribusiness piece, the biggest change in legislation over the last few years was the commissions being taken out of investments. So agribusiness was paying 10% commissions or up to it, and there was huge tax incentives. So there's all these things coinciding to. It wasn't. Yeah, I don't know if an APL really would have made a difference with
Adrian, if I can just redirect for a second. So let me ask you this way, perhaps more directly. If you had a magic wand that could change one thing about the industry to make it better, what would that thing be?
Get rid of SOAs. I just think they just get in the way of advice.
Okay, and what's the solution if there's no SOAs? What does that look like?
It's like I'll bring in Mark Twain here. I didn't have time to write you a short note, so I wrote you a long note. Paraphrase that one. Essentially, that when you're writing anything, if you can get what you want to say into a shorter, condensed version that's understandable, it's usually more concise, easier to understand, and effective than just filling up pages and pages of crap. And I've been going through this process with preparing for my advisor innovation presentation tomorrow. There's been a lot of revisions because you can just fill stuff up, and it's not adding much value to the client experience and the advisor experience. So that's my take on that.
So I think that's a really good point, and I might direct that one partly to Ben as well, because I think, you know, the ASIC have provided standards as to what a statement of advice should look like, and part of those standards suggests that there is that it should be concise and it should be easy to understand. And I know the FPA, I'm sure it would probably still be there, but I looked a while back and they've got a guideline as to, you know, a framework for a statement of advice as an example. There are, I think that the AFA's also got a framework for what an SOA should look like. I know that certain dealer groups, like I used to be licensed with Synchron, and they were really big on ensuring that their statements of advice were very condensed, and they did that quite effectively. But I've also been licensed with companies where we had 150-page statements of advice that were so dense that, you know, most people would, like I had literally had people that would pay, and I know that they're not paying just for the statement of advice, but they wouldn't even take it with them because they did that, you know, it's too much and they've got no real hope of understanding it. So what's the solution? Because I know a lot of people don't have access to or don't use these shorter SOAs in practice. So should there be some sort of obligation on licensees to ensure that they're not just, adding additional disclosures after disclosures to protect themselves, but resulting in a document that's so complex that, people don't understand it, Ben?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there with my issues with SOAs, and I certainly have significant issues with SOAs. Number one, it doesn't have to be a document. There's nothing in the law that says it needs to actually be a document. There are certain requirements about what needs to be included in a statement of advice, but I think everybody's wedded to your A4 page style document for no particular good reason. I think there's a lot of innovative ways that you can show clients the advice that you're providing them without being wedded to 150 pages. I'm not surprised somebody doesn't want to take 150 pages. It'd be heavy to just start with, and it would be boring and it would put you to sleep. We, when I was still with a licensee, we were experimenting with using infographics basically to provide the advice diagrams, each step of the advice, and then building explanations out from that where the client wanted more details. You could go to fact sheets, you could go to videos, it was a lot more dynamic for the client. Unfortunately, because of the technology we're using, it was still paper-based at that point, but the idea was to transition it to web apps, video, just make it a lot more real and make it a lot more understandable. So I agree SOAs in their current form are an issue. I'm really interested to see what ASIC puts out in the short term with their SOA project they're doing around life insurance, which shouldn't be taken as just being for life insurance. It will be applicable to everything. It's just focused on life insurance. And I'm excited to see what we see in the future. But don't be wedded to word-based, document-based, API-based SOAs. Do interesting stuff.
But what should advisors do, though, for the ones that are sort of constrained with their obligations under their licensees, that they don't really have the scope to turn around and say, oh, I want to deliver advice via an infographic, but because they would fail their audit and they're told that they need to deliver this, monstrosity of a document?
That's the ultimate issue, right? So if you are tied to a licensee that has decided that for their legal safety purposes they're going to impose that structure on you, then if you do want to do more innovative stuff, then there are other licensees out there who are getting more innovative and are looking at other options for delivery of SOAs. And I think in the FPA's view, a professional financial planner should first and foremost be making sure that they're delivering advice to the client that's easy to understand, easy for the client to get engaged with and get excited about and want to implement. And if your licensee is not giving you the opportunity to provide that, start pushing back. You're the professional. You're the one who's sitting with the client. You should be telling them what the client needs to be receiving. It shouldn't be the legal department telling you.
Are you saying we're being pussies, Ben?
Beg your pardon?
Sorry?
Is Ben saying we're all being pussies?
Yeah, I think he's saying we should all take to the streets and start a revolt.
Yeah.
That's what I got out of it anyway.
I certainly wouldn't have used those words, but but
very much into paraphrasing at XY Advisor, Ben.
Yeah, thank you. But I think there's definitely an opportunity if you see better things out there to go to your licensee and say, look, there's a better way to do it. I mean, I was basically in charge of the SOAs where I was, and we started looking for all sorts of different ways to better provide informative, engaging advice to our clients. And I've left, obviously, but my understanding is it's starting to get there finally.
Cool.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, and Tomo, what are you doing with your magic wand?
Mate, it's we're 15 minutes into the XY Live and I haven't said a word. I'm almost there. So my magic wand is actually gonna be helpful, unlike Clay's idea or Paddy's idea. Clay talks about APL, but that's not really the main issue. The main issue is product providers and advice providers are one in the same thing. My magic wand is you wouldn't have a product provider being a licensee. Like too often we have advice being the loss leader to push product, and that's not a profession. That's not a way we should run our business as an industry. But that's how we've structured it, where licensees own products as well, or licensees white label products, or and there's almost no licensee who isn't doing this as a second form of revenue, because running a dealer group is very expensive and very hard and very competitive. So you've got someone who, like an AMP, who's going to, buy back your clients at 4 times, as opposed to, a small independent licensee. How are they going to compete on price? And they are, they're different service offerings, but they do have to compete. So, they've got to look at ways of
I thought your point was just so dramatic, Phil, that Ben just fell off his seat.
Yeah, that's right. So for me, that's my magic wand. Get rid of the alignment between product providers and advice licensees. And that'll solve APL issues, because that's really an APL issue. Is the reason we have restricted APLs is because product providers have licensees and they want to push product.
Yeah, I think my solution's better, mainly because I'm opening, competition, and you're trying to come in and say, no, product provider, you're not allowed to give advice. You're trying to create more regulations. I'm trying to remove them. That's the kind of guy I am.
Yeah, but Clay, the issue is everyone has a standardized APL. That's fine, but the product providers of the world who still own licensees, are they going to just say fully open APL? We're not going to influence any of your decisions.
They should.
An APL makes very little difference, because every advisor can recommend any product they want. Licensees may put roadblocks in front of an advisor to recommend whatever they want, but most advisors out there realize that they can recommend anything they want. They just need to, if it's not on the APL, they just need to go through an extra process, and that may be not worthwhile.
So,
what's going on?
Oh, gee.
Oh, like Nashy. All right, he's cut out.
Well, what's your right of reply, Mr. Marshan? What do you say to Phil?
Well, I think Clayton's solution's already there. There is no legal requirement for an APL to exist. You just have to have a good basis for why the product you're recommending is appropriate for the client. And there's nothing in the law that says there should be an APL. I know PI insurers prefer to see the list of products that you've put through whatever filters you have within your licensee to say that's a product that's appropriate for the clients that we're advising on. But there's no legal requirement for them to be there.
Yeah. Well,
So
we should make them illegal then.
So Nashy, you're back. You just missed me and Clay having an argument for the first time ever. We never disagree on anything.
Right. Oh, I'm sad to have missed that. But look, Phil, to go back to your point there, though, in reality, that sounds like a lovely suggestion to me. But I can't see how that would be possible, given that the biggest product providers are also the biggest licensees. So how does that work when when one of the big banks or your AMP they're saying, well, they want to provide this service to their as part of their business model or whatever, but they also happen to be hugely involved in the manufacture of products. So is that just a like that would be a great thing, but I know it's never going to happen, or do you think it could work in practice?
Well, two things. You did give me a magic wand, but the second thing is banks are starting to look at moving out because regulation's becoming tighter. Product pushing is becoming harder and harder. So banks are looking at either moving out of advice or making advice standalone profitable, which is a good thing. You need a dealer group, a licensee on its own needs to be profitable. It shouldn't be built up on, making CBA shouldn't make a loss on CBA financial planning, but their ComInsure or CFS or any of their product providers, making money off the back of that. So in terms of practicality, how's it going to work out? Well, it's already starting, but yeah, I guess it is kind of a dream. And as Clay mentioned, the biggest issue with it is that you're reducing competition in the market, which means that fees will just go right up. But fees probably should go up. Like it's relatively cheap for what regulation's really high. So if we lower regulation, make it easier to do business, then fees won't necessarily increase because running a licensee will become easier.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a market in that you can always choose to be self-licensed as well. So if dealer groups make their costs too expensive, more and more people just move to go down that path as well. Okay, and so Ben, do you want to go with the magic wand as well? I'm sure you spent a lot of time thinking about this sort of stuff.
My wand is, I've got too many things, I think, to throw in there. My main, I would say that there is probably a framework in place at the moment for the profession of advice to move forward quite successfully. I think what planners need to be doing is getting a lot more innovative with the way that they engage with their clients and the way that they provide advice to their clients. And if we start doing that, then consumers will want to come to us and want to engage with us and want to get advice and get their dreams and hopes and financial positions put in a better way. So I guess the challenge I would be putting out there is, yes, there are some arguments we need to run with the regulators and with government to make sure that we've got the space to do what we need to do. But the challenge for everybody is, how do we make advice more engaging? What tools do you need? What ideas do you need? What do you need the FPA to help get things out of the way that can help you be really engaging with your clients and give them world-class service?
Yeah, awesome. And I think that's a great idea. And I love the, making advice simpler and, using things like, images and infographics to increase that engagement with clients. I think that sort of bookends with what I was thinking about when I was getting ready for today, what I would do to change one thing as well. And it would probably start where before even getting yours. But I think that one of the issues with advice is that no one knows what advice is. Consumers don't know, especially if you haven't had an advisor before. And I don't know how, and I completely appreciate that it's difficult with the differences between all different advice firms and how people do it. But, I think the Money Smart website is a great resource for, different, calculators, tools and information. But I feel like the government or or you guys or the associations and could have help people understand what advice is and how it should work, so that they know themselves how to figure out what advice is good advice and what advice isn't good. Because I think that would go a long way to reducing, some of the issues that we've seen in advice, and it's often the things that reduce that consumer confidence as well. So just to understand the basic process, how it works, the things that they should be aware of. But I think that would go a long way. Then you come in with your engaging advice, and I think that those together would go a long way to getting a lot more people into the advice and knowing when it is good for them as well.
Ben, there was a topic that we talked about a while back. It came up on XY Advisor. I sort of threw you into it, which is about tax deductibility, and I guess pushing the limits of how that sits in terms of, obviously it's an income earning endeavour usually for a tax deduction. And how much of a place do you think that plays in terms of helping advice get out there and be more accepted in the community?
So I would say I don't think it will necessarily help with the cost of advice, but it will certainly make advice more attractive to consumers. I don't like it, but consumers love negative gearing, right? Because they're getting a tax break. Whoever came up with negative gearing was the biggest con artist that's ever existed, in my view. But I think if advice was seen as being tax deductible, then the same way that people can do their own tax returns, they go to accountants because they get a tax deduction for doing it. So I think it's probably a way to get people more engaged with advice, but I don't think if the experience is still the same as what people are getting today, and the way it's delivered is still the same, then I don't know that it'll actually move the needle too far. But we certainly are pushing very hard to get advice to be tax deductible because, and certain aspects of it certainly are today. You just have to do a hell of a lot of work to provide the client with the information they need to claim a tax deduction at the moment. And obviously upfront advance isn't tax deductible. We think it should be.
I would agree on that as well. I think that the advice should be. I know, when I work with clients, even the cost for initial advice, I can't understand why, and especially when you see that the results of the financial planning process and it ends up putting people in a better position, so they invest more money and effectively end up paying, setting themselves up for their investments for the future and reducing dependency on government entitlements. That it just doesn't make sense that there is no deduction claimable for that, if in my view at least.
So what I'd say is we're about to work with a few other associations on a big research project that tries to, again, better quantify advice and what advice can do for consumers, and therefore we'll have that argument to take to the Productivity Commission.
Should XY be a part of that conversation?
Absolutely. We're happy for everybody to be part of that conversation, and that's what I'm here for today.
Are associations working together now, are they?
Associations always work together. I don't know how much people look at what all the associations are doing, but we're all generally pulling in the same direction. We often do consensus submissions to government. We often go together to government and treasury and regulators and work together. There's not really a lot of difference between the positions that all the different associations are pushing. There's nuances, but we have regular conversations with each other is the reality. We're always talking to know what's going on with everybody else. We do a lot of work together because if we're all pushing in the same direction, that's when we can get things changed.
Great answer. Okay, so next thing I want to talk about is what are the roadblocks that you think are standing in the way of building consumer trust in financial advice? I'll put it to you first, Patty.
What do you think we can do to build consumer trust?
Well, what are the roadblocks? What's standing in the way, and conversely, what could we do to increase the confidence in advice or increase the trust?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time it's the way advice can be communicated sometimes. It's, I guess, really, and you start to see it with some of the people we have on XY Advisor, like just how they've been able to cut through to an audience and just be so relevant to them. And I think the challenge of how everything's evolved is that advisors aren't to cut through. You're not the expert that knows everything. You've got to actually be talking to the people. And I think that's what everyone's continually learning and getting better at. And I think it's really in the marketing space and how you actually communicate your value proposition to clients. And I think that's where everyone has challenges. We all struggle with it from time to time. Ben, I think you're doing a really good job at nailing a target market, and But yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges, like our own ability to communicate what we do and how we can help people, and get it across to people when they've got so many different messages bombarding them regularly, from like with social media. Like there's so much going on these days, and that's I think it's cutting through. That's probably one of the biggest challenges.
Okay. Cool. Phil?
I think advice is a difficult profession to gain trust, because we are always looking forward in our advice. It's always forward looking. So it's difficult to really, especially investment, like if we're talking straight investment advice, you're not promising a return, but you're always looking forward, saying, hey, I think this is the best product for your current circumstances. And that's how we've come from. That's kind of the space that we've come out of. Or insurance, saying, I promise you, if you do get injured, you're going to get paid out. And, they may never get injured and may be paying thousands of dollars on a premium for their whole lifetime and never get paid out anything. So on top of the fact that our service offering is really expensive, it's not accessible to the masses. For 95% of all advice businesses, we charge a really high fee. So you look at other professions that have a high trust level, like doctors or accountants, they've always dealt with everyone in the community. But we, as financial advisors, we don't. So how do we build trust? It's difficult, but we do need to have low cost service offerings for the masses. And not every business owner needs to run their own product or their own kind of service offering to reach a lot of people. But in our current state, we don't have that one business that's really reaching the masses in terms of financial advice.
Yeah, look, that's a good point, and I think that's something that we'll see more over time. We had Ben Scully from Wealth Sherpa in a little while back talking about how they're providing those lower cost, lower touch service offerings. And my view is that a lot of financial advisors I've heard complain about the fact that they can't service the client, or that this is why they need to get paid. I know when the debates were happening around insurance commissions, that was one of the arguments. But I think that the technology is there to support that these days. It just takes someone to go and create the offering and make it compelling and make it valuable for people. But I think that we'll certainly see that over the coming years.
Yeah, and I'd argue Acorns is a great example of someone who I would think have a really high trust level with their customers. Low fee, low cost, really easy to deal with. They're a company that I think are really nailing that space in increasing trust in their company. But how do we do that as a whole? It's just a difficult game we play.
Yeah. Clay?
Yeah, so there's two things. There's the macro sort of industry-wide problem of trust, and I think that's going to be a decades-long battle to move away from our poor reputation that we've got, where we rank around the same level as politicians. So there's that macro problem. The good news is, however, a lot of advisors are on a micro level cutting through to their audience. So just because financial advice as a whole may be poorly trusted, you've got some excellent examples, such as there's many examples, right? So I don't want to point someone out individually, but there are advisors that are doing really well in doing, getting involved with the community, being that name that people trust, and they're being a source of information, and people like who they can get to know through a computer, via GIFs and PDFs and ebooks and whatever. If they're a source of knowledge, then it's very easy to go to them for advice. And so there might be a macro problem, but there are many examples of advisors doing a good job on a micro level.
You've got 3 advisors on the panel. You couldn't just drop our names in there, Clay?
Mate, I'll be sucking up too much. Come on now.
And Ben, I know your previous comments on the thing to improve, I think sort of would also go a long way to increasing trust in advice. But what do you think in terms of the roadblocks? Or I know you guys are out there asking questions like this at the moment. What are you hearing are the major roadblocks?
So I don't know that there's a problem with trust in individual advisors. I think if you even look at ASIC's data, in some of the shadow shoppers, consumers who have a financial planner really, really trust their financial planner. It's the others in the community who hear the bad news stories. So I mean, one of the things that we've got going to try and change the message and try and help with that message is our Money in Life website, where we're getting you, the financial planners, the experts in providing advice and improving clients' lives, to write stories and articles and get those good news stories out there. And they're really starting to be picked up by the mainstream media and republished quite frequently. So, you know, the issue is those good news stories haven't been written, that they weren't out there. So we've created a website to try and achieve that. But I think that the biggest thing I would say is that we need to stop fighting with each other. We need to stop arguing with each other. We need to stop the tit for tat and the disrespect that we have for each other. And if we all come together and talk about each other respectfully, work with each other respectfully, share with each other, build a community of professionals, then those right attitudes will start to get out there really quickly, which is, again, why I think this sort of community where you do have young, engaged, passionate people who want to be out there changing people's lives is so important, and we think it's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we see a lot. Well, we're seeing more and more is that sense of cooperation. I know I was reading an article the other day talking about how, you know, people aren't networking, but I'm not sure. I think that may have just been a media play, but from where I stand, it seems that more and more people they're happy to share their ideas. You know, we see it on the Facebook group that we've got, that everyone's more than happy to help out with a question and share that knowledge. And I think that's going to, increase the quality of advice, but then also, increase reduce the bashing and have people, you know, get that, you know, higher level of trust as well.
But I was
just got a comment from Leon Jones just on the trust issue, just talking about the discretionary spend as well. And I don't know, I'm sure you guys have probably dealt with the same issue before, but I think that, you know, from where I stand, people see it as discretionary, but when you can clearly, you know, really clearly articulate the value that you do provide, I think that that helps with the discretion factor. But at the end of the day, I think it's difficult to avoid that, because people, they just strangely, you know, cut their costs, and we sort of suffer as well. So I just got a quick question. I'm just mindful of time because I do still have quite a few other points to get through. But quick question from Peter Bowman, who's watching in, asking if we'd be happy for an AFSL holder to give up spending on things like conferences and non-essential services and just provide a super low-cost solution. Super quickly, Clay, you don't have a license, but...
Yeah, look, there should be a low-cost option for every business, for sure.
Adrian?
I think it's a marketplace, so people generally have choice, and if someone wants to offer a solution that does that, it could be a winner. Yeah.
Tomo?
I'd be surprised if there wasn't already a dealer group out there who marketed themselves that way.
Yeah, I think I think you're probably right, but I would agree that it's the marketplace. For me personally, I think I'm happy to go without that stuff from my licensee if that means that I have to pay more money, because I think there's so much stuff that's happening out there these days that if you want to go to a conference or go to an event, you can go through an association, through a community, an advice community, or or otherwise as well. Cool. So I've got a comment here about scoping advice, and I think that scoping advice is, I think, is pretty much one of the worst things about financial advice. Although that being said, I don't know what the solution is, because sometimes it is absolutely necessary. But personally, I feel that scoping advice can be used as a way for advisors to effectively shirk what should be their responsibility to provide advice in certain areas. And I feel that the resulting client outcomes are not as good as they would otherwise be, should the customer clearly understand the opportunities in other areas, and then the advisor be able to appropriately address those as well. So I'm keen to get the thoughts of you guys and see your views on scoping, but also to whether you think that there is a solution or a way that we can ensure that people's needs, whether the advisor is the right advisor for them or not, are covered, and in terms of whether advisors should be able to, what the standards should be also around advisor being able to say, well, I can advise on self-managed super funds even though I never do it, or I can advise on direct shares but I don't do it as well. So I'll start with you, Tomo.
I think in terms of scoping, I kind of think it's okay to scope. We kind of do it anyway. Like we talk about life insurance, but we don't do anything to do with general insurance. We talk about, most advisors will talk about, investments or buying a house, but we don't do mortgage broking. So we scope. Yeah, sure, we're not licensed to do mortgage broking, but we scope aspects of clients' financial lives anyway. So to go further down that rabbit hole and say, well, I only do insurance advice, I'm going to scope everything out. As long as you've got a good system to refer those clients out if you see a need. But I mean, even then, we still, how many people refer out to a general insurance broker or have a great referral relationship with a mortgage broker? There wouldn't be a massive percentage. And to say we need to be doing that is a big kind of burden on our business.
Yeah, look, I suppose that the reason that I get so annoyed with this scenario is that I see a lot of people. Like in our business, we work with young people. Most of our clients are in late 20s and 30s, pretty much, and a lot of them we're typically for half we're their first experience with seeing an advisor. For the other half, they might have seen one before, but for that other half who have seen an advisor in the past, it might be with one of the big banks or institutions, and they see an advisor, but the advisor just wants to talk about life insurance or superannuation because they just do that sort of advice. This person is called a financial advisor, and then that carries through to see that now they think that this is what financial advisors do. And I think that getting that message out that there are so many more things, that's the ones, everyone's got a super fund, and I think it's a race to the bottom, really. There's not so much difference between the funds that are out there these days. Life insurance is, it's easy for an advisor to add value there, but certainly other things outside of that is where there's a lot of value around the strategy and the goal setting and the accountability and the planning process, as well as the investments and all of the other technical strategies that sit alongside it. And, from my position, I see these people and they get turned off advice typically because they think that it's just an advisor's just going to want to talk to them about life insurance. But I don't know, perhaps, blaming it all on scoping is not the right way, but I suppose, how can we clearly articulate the specialty areas for advisors and make it clear so that a consumer knows that when they see an advisor, what sort of advice they're going to get or how it works as well?
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of how to deliver advice. I'm totally on board. That's exactly how I run my business. I want to help understand the client's needs and help them with everything. But it's difficult to say that every advisor needs to be providing holistic advice, because it's just like it's just like me coming to you and saying, hey, you deal with young professionals, but their parents may need advice, and you're not doing your job well enough unless you speak to their parents and offer a service to their parents. And how far reaching do we go in saying, well, you can't really scope out of certain areas. I totally agree with you. I've had many clients come to me and say, I've had an advisor, they just did super and insurance. And it's like, well, that's not really an advice. Like, for me and my understanding and what I truly believe, that's not really what an advisor should be doing. That's just like ticking off two products in a part of the advice. So I agree with you, but how far do we go? Does every advisor need to be competent in every aspect of every client's financial affairs? How about that?
That's sort of what I was asking you.
Yeah, but you don't do it, Ben. That's what I'm saying. I don't think it's appropriate, because it's just like saying you can't niche into one area of your client's demographic, because you're doing them a disservice by not helping their parents look after estate planning, because that's going to impact your client. So, how you've effectively scoped out their parents from your advice process.
Yeah, I agree. I refer them to Steve Nielsen because I know that he looks after them. But what I'm getting at is that I know, and good advisors do refer in those areas as well, but I think that's not practice en masse. So Ben, I might get your thoughts, because you probably have a bit more insight to the technical side of things on this, but is there another way that we could get around this to make sure that it's clear to consumers what sort of advice they're going to get, or what advice is typically covered by the person that they see, and how it all works from that end?
So I don't know that. Firstly, I'd say that I think every piece of advice is scoped, as Phil said. The reality is consumers can't deal with a piece of advice that helped them achieve everything in one fell swoop. We need to stage it. We need to do it over time, and we need to agree with the client what's the most important things that we need to deal with today. I dealt with retirees, but I dealt with them in the lead up to retirement, and often the first 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it was, how do we maximize super, but how do we pay off debts? How do we put savings plans in place? How do we understand what your spending is going to be like in retirement, what plans, and helping them develop those plans. But the advice that we would ultimately give was around what they need to do with their super. What I would also say is I've looked at a lot of advice in my various roles. Scoping is generally about the worst bit of the advice process that I see done. It is the only way a consumer knows that the advice has been scoped in any way is often in this section in an SOA that's unclear and doesn't say what's in and what's out, and often contradicts the advice that's actually being provided. It's done terribly. So I think that is something that planners probably need to focus on. How do I tell the consumer that, and get agreement with the consumer and get them comfortable with, this is what we're going to deal with in this engagement, and over time we're going to build these other things into your overall plan, but this is your financial position, this is what you want to achieve over time, and we'll get there. We just need to do it in bits and pieces. But it's done terribly, in my view.
Yeah. So what do you think, though? And I would agree with you. But what do you think is the solution? Because I think, I see, and this is why I started framing the question around scoping, but that it's basically a cop out. I understand that some things need to be scoped. But I see it as a way that advisors can avoid. Or they just focus on the areas that they want to focus on and exclude the other areas. And especially you see consumer, and they're coming in and they're talking about setting up a financial plan. They don't understand the financial jargon. They're generally not completely comfortable talking about all their money with someone they've just met. They're out of their element. They're sort of not in the strongest sort of position. And then you know, a lot of conversations are had and they end up agreeing to, it might be mentioned, but perhaps it's not clear the implications of them agreeing to advice being scoped. But is disclosure the answer? More disclosure? Because I feel like we've got a lot of disclosure.
Oh,
Yeah, no. So no, it's absolutely not the answer. I think we're in that. We're still, because we're still a young profession. We haven't necessarily found our niches. If you go to a GP, he won't be a specialist in anything, but he'll be able to help you identify what your issue may be, and who you might need to go and see to actually help that. And I think there is absolutely a role for financial planners and financial counsellors to help clients set out what their financial dreams and hopes and objectives and goals are, and get a really good understanding of what their entire financial position is. But then say, someone over here is going to be your expert in super, somebody over here is going to be your expert in life insurance. And I think over time, the profession will get to that. The problem we've got at the moment is that people don't know where to go as that starting point. And often they end up at the super expert, and often they end up at the life insurance expert. And that person is comfortable giving that advice, is probably licensed to give advice, is an expert in that advice, and that's where they're comfortable. And so they do that piece of advice, but there's not the moving them around to where they actually need to be. And again, I think that comes down to this trust and community issue that I spoke about earlier. If we're all working together, then it's easy to refer people to the right people to get what they need. If we're not, if we're siloed the way we are at the moment, then that's where you get the poor outcomes.
Nashy, I don't know if we've got time, but it might be interesting hearing from Clay, because from memory, Clay, you scoped out insurance advice when you were in the dark ages when you were a planner. Is that right?
For a little while, but I mean,
I never gave insurance advice.
Yeah.
In the end, I stopped giving it. Yes. It's such a hard thing. Like, I totally get what you mean, Ben, in that it's used as a way for advisors not to do, or just to focus on their one little way that they can get money. But at the same time, like, how do you solve it? Literally, the only solution to that problem is for everyone to become an expert in everything. And then disclosure obviously doesn't solve the problem either. So then I guess
I don't think everybody does need to be an expert in everything. They need to be an expert in understanding a client's finances. They don't have to be an expert in providing advice on everything.
Yeah, which is definitely my point, because so that's not a solution. Like, that's way too difficult, and we don't even see that in the medical profession. So I think what we'll probably see is the result being you'll have like a coach person who takes that GP role, and then each technical thing will get outsourced to the technical boffins behind the scene, almost like specialists that you send them to. And probably that'll be tech, right? Like, probably certainly within 10 years, that'll just be automatic, right? So someone walks in, you have a chat to them, you figure out what they want out of life, you figure out what bad decisions they're doing, what path they're on, you get them to come over here. Oh, by the way, due to the conversations we've had, this is now done. There's your super and insurance, and then, there's your mortgage. And I think that'll probably just end up being tech, and the person in the middle will be that coach. I think that's probably the closest solution that I can think of.
I'd agree with that. I can absolutely see that's where we'll end up going, is that financial planning, the financial planner will essentially be the coach or the hub in the middle of a wheel, and all the spokes that are on the outside of the wheel will be outsourced to other experts or other professions or using technology.
Yeah, I'd love to see that, and I think it's, like you say, it's hard to be a specialist in all areas as well, and I think technology will really help to support that as well. Patty, just for the final comment on this point, I might just throw to you before we wrap it up, and we have gone a little over time. So, what are your thoughts on this scoping, specialising?
Yeah, it's a hard one. We technically cover, an advisor can cover, it's probably the broadest profession as that there is. Like, you can't, like, medicine's been around. This is probably how medicine starts. I really like that analogy because they've managed over time, they've specialised, but like at the moment, we're across, and the legislation's putting it on us with best interest duty to be across everything. Like, it's, even though there hasn't been much, enforcement around that space yet, it's still open architecture. Like the legal system hasn't had a chance to really get its teeth into anything yet around that space, and it's not really defined. So at the moment, we're sitting here with, like, we can wear whatever hat we want within this really wide range. And a lot of people are specialising, and which forces them to scope things out. A lot of people would like to keep things broad so they can cover those areas. But what the challenge that comes in there is the cost of doing that, and the way that, I guess, regulation forces so many cost layers when you want to do things in a modularized fashion, like you're alluding to, Ben. Like when you want to break up advice, which is the ideal way of sort of people consuming advice, so it's not so in your face. The way the cost of delivering advice and the documentation is designed, and the compliance procedures, it forces and incentivizes advisors to jam as much into at the start as possible, because it's just the cost of actually then doing that piecemeal is cost on the advisor, and often they have to subsidize the cost to deliver that piecemeal to the client because it's just not, because of the documentation and requirements there. So I think it's a cost thing. It's a lack of definition to what, I guess, it's a breadth of what we cover issue. And it's just going to be something that plays out. And really, technology is one of the best things that's going to help us there. And I think that coach space and the centralized hub piece is, yeah, I agree. Totally.
Can I just answer that quickly? I think part of the issue is that we undersell the value of the advice we're providing. I think for a lot of planners, unless they feel like they're giving 5-6 different solutions to the client's problems, they can't justify the $3,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 fee. The value in advice is putting a plan in place with the client and helping them achieve that over the long term. And I think we need to be a lot more comfortable with telling consumers that that is actually our value, not the solutions that we put in place at the end of the day.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think a very fitting way to wrap this up. For everyone watching in, I know that the FPA are currently working on updating their 10-point plan, which they basically it's their 10 points they want to cover off with the regulators over the coming years. Ben tells me they ticked off pretty much 9.5 from their last plan that they put together. So if anyone's got any feedback, ideas, suggestions that they have or that they want to reach out about to the FPA, there's I can see Ben's just put his email in the contact tab there. Is that the best way to get in touch, Ben?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Through email at fpa@fpa.com.au. For any members that are listening in the member centre in the communities, we've got the forums going on at the moment to have these discussions with other members. But if anybody needs my help or wants my advice or tips, just send an email to fpa@fpa.com.au and attention me.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Ben, very much for joining us. It's great to have you sitting on the forum with us today. Gentlemen, thank you also. Very valuable insights. And Phil, I can't believe you agreed with me. I think that's the first time that happened, but that was really nice. That was a highlight for me. Guys, next week we've got another XY Live with Brian Kenner, who he amazingly gets a 78% referral rate inside his business from his clients, and we're going to talk to him about how he does that. So I think that's going to be a really good chat. Feel free to join us, and the Jackie has just put the registration link up there as well. If you're not on the Facebook group, you should get involved ASAP, because there's some awesome conversations happening in there as well. Thanks again to AIA for helping us out with this event. And yeah, look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ben.
See you guys.